You've found the Backup Wrap-Up, your go-to podcast for all things backup, recovery, and cyber recovery. In this episode, we take a hard look at why your 4-hour recovery time objective is probably a fantasy. That's what I said, a fantasy. Look, we all love setting aggressive RTOs and meetings, but when disaster strikes, reality is a bit different. Whether it's ransomware, natural disasters, or just plain old hardware failure, there's always complications that blow past that 4-hour window. Join Prasanna and I as we break down why these aggressive RTOs often don't work in real life, what you should actually plan for, and how to have honest conversations about recovery capabilities with your business units. By the way, if you don't know who I am, I'm W. Curtis Preston, aka Mr. Backup, and I've been passionate about backup and recovery for over 30 years, ever since I had to tell my boss that we have no backups of the production database that we just lost. I don't want that to happen to you, and that's why I do this show. On this podcast, we turn unappreciated backup admins into cyber recovery heroes. This is the Backup Wrap-Up. Welcome to the show. Hi, I'm W. Curtis Preston, aka Mr. Backup, and I have with me a guy that maybe if he had been here a few days ago, I wouldn't have beat up a service person and thrown him out of my house. Okay, I didn't beat him up, but I just think that you would have reacted calmer.
Me? Really? Really?
Yeah. Don't you think that you...
Who am I, by the way? You didn't even say my name. You got distracted.
Oh, yes. Prasanna Maliandi.
Oh, Curtis. But, yeah. So I know you're getting new appliances delivered.
Yeah.
And it didn't go quite as you had thought. And you got upset. And you kicked the person out of the house. And he was on his way out. He was like, I was just going to do it for you anyway, but... Now you end up with this whole fiasco. Yeah.
And then this is Costco, by the way. And then they sent the second team, right, to do the install. And then they showed up and they're like, well, where's your appliance? I'm like, what do you mean? You're supposed to bring the appliance. So now I'm going on install number 3, which is going to be Saturday, allegedly. And it's either going to go perfect or not, because I'm not even going to be here. My wife will be here. And
might I recommend you being home for this, if possible?
I'm not going to be there, because if it goes wrong, I might yell at people.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
So here's
5
my
days without a washer dryer.
Yeah. So here's my thing, and I hope you have clean clothes before you started this project.
Somewhat.
Yeah. So here's my reasoning: service people, like, if they maybe could do something different, they may choose to. It's not their fault typically. Like, I find it to be better to be kind to people and to treat them how I would. Like, it really annoys me when people sort of are very disrespectful, or they treat service people, take your pick, like, poorly, right? On an ongoing basis, like thinking as if they don't even exist. Right.
And generally I am that person as well. It's when the service person, I don't know, it's when they come across to me as
having an attitude, or
that they could do something slightly different, but they refuse to do so. And by the way, in this scenario, he proved that he could have done something different, but he wasn't offering the other thing. I'm not going into it. But
be kind, rewind.
Right. Be kind, rewind. Yeah, I wish I could rewind. In the end, if I had reacted differently,
you would be wearing clean clothes right now.
I would be what? Yeah, I would be exactly. So hopefully it'll be, we'll get new clothes coming up here on Saturday. Or I'm sorry, the new washer dryer.
Yeah. So it's or you can be like Reacher, which by the way I'm reading the books. You can
Yeah,
be like Reacher who doesn't believe in traveling with anything, and so he just goes to the local store,
yeah.
buys the clothes he needs, and then
He has
tosses them when he's done.
he has a toothbrush, right?
That's the
Doesn't he
only thing
travel
he
with a
carries.
toothbrush?
Yep.
Yeah, yeah. No, I don't see that. I don't see me being that guy. But so hey, we're gonna talk about
But wait, before you get there, you
what?
forgot one more thing.
What did I forget?
You forgot to ask people if you like the podcast, please subscribe. Right? We also have YouTube, so if you want to
Yes.
see our expressions and our lovely faces, then you can also
Yeah,
check us out on YouTube.
yeah, YouTube channel by the same name, the
Yeah.
Backup Wrap Up.
Yeah. And if you'd like us, please leave a comment on your favorite podcast app. If you use Apple Podcast or whatever else you use, leave a message. It helps us. It exposes us to new people. People can find us, all the good stuff.
All the things.
Because we do this for
Absolutely.
you.
We do this for you. So today we're talking about the 4 hour. It's a very common this idea of a 4 hour RTO, 4 hour recovery time objective, and I think it's fantasy for most people. I, I just think it's a nice thing that we say in meetings, and it's not reality in many scenarios. That's what I want to talk about.
Yeah. And maybe we should start with first, what is encompassed in a recovery time objective? Like, what is it supposed to be measuring? Right? What is it supposed to help you understand?
Absolutely, yeah. So we'll talk about recovery. We'll do the basics here in the beginning. Recovery time objective, recovery point objective, and then, because you never know where people are at.
Yeah.
Right. So I think the two most important metrics. One could argue the only important metrics in a recovery, a backup and recovery or a disaster recovery system, are recovery time objective and recovery point objective, which is, and I will just say, and I've said this before, my first couple of years in backups, I never heard these terms at all, right? The only thing we talked about was backup window. We might have talked a little bit about recovery speed, a little bit, but we were so much more focused on getting the backups done than we were on the design of the. If we could restore it all, we were happy,
Yeah.
right? But what you should be doing is you should be designing your backup system or your DR system. And for those that listen to the podcast on a regular basis, you know that I don't distinguish between those two.
Yeah.
There is operational recovery and disaster recovery, but it is possible to do both of those with one system. It just needs to be properly designed, right?
Yeah.
There are reasons to have a separate DR system, perhaps for a really mission critical system that the operational recovery, backup and recovery system isn't able to meet the RTO, but or RPO. But in general, I think for most people, we can do both with one thing. So, you want to start with RTO? What is recovery time objective, Prasanna?
So, recovery time objective is something happens. How long does it take you to recover and get back up and running? Right. So, how long does it take you to, say, restore your data? Which I think is typically what a lot of backup people think about is, hey, I'm responsible for the data. Let me just restore the data. When we talk about recovery time objective, though, it's not just the data. It's, remember, bringing you back up to production, right? So application recovery, any other environment stuff, right? So you're part of this entire process of recovering the environment may only be a small portion. There's a whole bunch of other things that also need to happen.
Yeah, that's I think that's what we're going to talk about, right? The restore part, right, is typically it's probably a large subset, but it's a very, it is
not the only.
It is not the only part of the recovery time objective, right? Yeah. The way you described it is perfect. It's from the bad thing happening, whatever that is, to everything is back up and running, right? The time, and we have an objective, right, of that being 4 hours.
Yep.
And that's what we're talking about here. And I think that in most cases, that is probably fantasy.
Yep.
So the And then I'll talk about recovery point
Yeah.
objective, which is its sister metric. And that is the amount of data as measured by time that we've agreed that we're allowed to lose.
But why,
Right.
Curtis, would I ever lose any data?
Because we're not all using CDP. That's why, right? Because the amount of data that you're going to lose is going to be a function of how often you back up. If you back up once a day, you're going to lose probably at least 24 hours worth of data when the disaster happens, unless the disaster happens to right after the backup is done, right? You could lose up to a day's worth of data. You could lose more than that, actually, if last night's backup didn't work, right?
So
Yeah.
here's one thing that bothers me when people talk about recovery point objectives.
Uh-huh.
Right? You said if I run a backup once a day, the most I could probably lose is 24 hours. Right?
I think I said
At least. Yeah.
at least, yeah.
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 Because
Yeah.
I think people don't realize. So you start a backup, right? It takes some amount of time for that backup to finish. During
Right.
that time, you're still exposed,
Yes.
right? So say you're running a backup once a day, right? So your previous backup, say, takes 8 hours to run. The snapshot that backup is from, or the version it's from, right, is probably at midnight.
Right.
The next midnight you start, but it's going to take you 8 hours, right?
Right.
So now it's 8 a.m. So
Right.
technically you are 32 hours is your
Yeah.
best recovery point objective. Just want to make
Yeah.
it clear to people because sometimes they forget about that data transfer part, which I think is also important to consider.
Yeah, so if you're right that the way most backups work, well, I'm going to say most backups, is that there's some kind of snapshot that's taken at the beginning. This happens magically in Windows. It will generally happen in Unix and Linux type environments if we're talking databases. If it's just file systems, that generally you don't see this, but you get that snapshot in the beginning, and then like you said, it might take 8 hours. If your failure happens in the middle of that, the last good backup was midnight
days.
the previous day, right?
Yeah.
So you're going to have more than 24 hours, and if that backup failed,
Yep.
then
You
you're
gotta go
looking
back.
at,
Yeah.
48 plus 60 hours at that
Yeah.
point, right? So yeah, that basically recovery point objective is, again, the objective. We're saying that we want to lose no more than X number of hours worth of data. And again, if you're saying something like an hour, or 4 hours, if you're saying 4 hours, I hope you have a really good backup and recovery system that is taking frequent snapshots throughout the day, because otherwise that also is going to be fantasy, right?
Yep.
But there are companion metrics. One is basically how fast we can recover. The other is how much data are we going to lose when we do recover. And again, both of these are the objectives. These are the SLAs, these service level agreements that we as an environment have come to an agreement between the business unit or business units that are affected and the IT people that are going to try to pull this off. This is the objective, and then we have another couple of terms.
Before you move on,
You're dying to throw something.
I am.
I've been seeing it on your face.
Instead of calling it SLAs, I would like to call them SLOs, because service level objectives, right? Because an agreement kind of has sort of more stringent requirements. Right.
Yeah, I don't know if I agree with you there.
Because
I don't know if we're arguing over a difference. It's not a distinction, but the reason why I like to call it SLAs is that we've all agreed to this.
That's true,
right? You're the business unit. I'm the IT. We have agreed that this is what we're going to shoot for. Yeah. That's why I like the term service level agreement.
Okay.
We all agree that this is what we're going for.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
Service level objective agreed to service level objectives. I think it's important to understand, and we don't say this often enough. None of this should come from IT.
Yep.
Right. This should come from
the business,
the function of the business or organization that we're doing this for.
Yeah.
Right. The tip of the spear. Right.
Yep.
The people that are out there actually whatever it is that we do for to make money or to deliver services or whatever it is.
And you're going to be
should be
designing
determined by
systems
that.
based on these or objectives, right?
Right. And it's going to be a push-pull, right? We've had this discussion before. You're going to say, how fast do you think recovery should be? And they go, 2 minutes. And you go, I can't do that.
Or you could say
Right.
$1 billion.
Yeah. We could do that with $1 billion. And, and how much data can you afford to lose? None, right? Everybody wants an RPO and an RTO of 0. And then, it's this push and pull between the IT people to say, listen, we can do that, but it's going to cost $1 billion. And that $1 billion is going to be allocated to your business unit. Are you okay with that?
Yep.
And if they go, yes.
And
then you
maybe
go,
it's fine.
okay.
Yeah, because if a minute of downtime is tens of millions of dollars,
Right.
maybe that is an acceptable cost for them.
Yeah, and you do see that in like financial trading firms, right? Financial organizations of any kind, because data loss directly translates into direct money loss, and so they're able to directly justify downtime equals this many dollars. Therefore, we're willing to spend this many dollars to make sure that doesn't happen. But it is important to understand that we don't just do that for everything, right? We only do that for the mission critical systems. Meanwhile, we've got a part of the company that if they lost 2 weeks worth of data, it wouldn't impact the business one iota.
Yep.
And so they get a different SLA, right? They get a different recovery point objective and recovery time objective.
So now that we've covered RTO and RPO, but I think 2 other terms we should actually throw out.
I know which ones they are. RPA and RTA?
Yep.
Yeah.
So
a lot of people say, well, my RPO is 4 hour, RTO is 4 hours, when what they mean to say is my RTA is 4 hours. So your RPO and RTO, those are the objectives. What you're actually able to do is often referred to as RTA and RPA, recovery time actual, right? I've in years past, I also called it RTR, recovery time reality, right? So
or
you can
achievable?
say,
Achieved?
achievable. Yeah. What are you actually able to do, right? You can say our RTO is 4 hours. Our RTA is 3 days.
Yep.
Right. This is quite common, is to have stuff where here's our objective. We're nowhere near the objective. As long as everybody knows that that's where we're at, it's a conversation you can have, right?
One question that I also had is, can your RTA differ depending on what the failure scenario is?
That is a very philosophical question. Not everybody agrees with that, with the answer, right?
Like
I happen to be one that says yes, right? If an atomic bomb wiped out your entire county, I think it's perfectly acceptable for you to have a different recovery time than if something caught on fire.
But this should all be part of when you are providing the RTO and RPO and working through that with the business and coming back with the SLAs, you need to take into consideration, is this for all recovery scenarios, or is this only for some recovery scenarios?
Right.
And maybe some are common ones you have certain times and others are maybe longer, like you mentioned.
So, for example, let's say it's 4 hours. Again, I'm saying that this is usually fantasy for most people. If the bad thing that we're dealing with is a ransomware attack, you can forget your 4 hours. You can forget your 4 days, right? Because it's going to take you many days, possibly weeks, to get to the point where you can actually do the restore part, right?
Depending on technology.
Right? But I'm just saying, in most cases, if it's if what we're talking about is ransomware, depending on how well you prepared for it, and even if you did prepare for it, right?
It's not going to be hours. Yeah.
Just to quote a famous person, everybody's got a plan until you get hit in the face.
Yeah.
That was not a very good Mike Tyson impersonation.
No, it was not.
But yeah, everybody's got a plan until they get hit in the face, right? You can have the best, best laid plans. You get ransomware attack. I mean, all the ones that I keep hearing about. It's never the way you thought it was going to be, right?
Yeah.
There's always the we're going to need a bigger boat moment, right?
Yep. Your best laid plans and go out the window.
All right, so let's talk about the core issue that I have. And
Only
that
one?
is,
Only one?
Well, I think that the core issue with why your recovery time objective is probably fantasy is because there is almost always going to be something large meaning time. There is almost always going to be something that's going to take a really long period of time that is going to have to happen before you can whip out your magic backup system. We've talked about one of them, and probably the chief at this point is the ransomware forensic process that has to happen, because you don't know. It's not like a fire, right? And again, my hearts go out to, I know a couple of people that have lost their homes. I live in Southern California. I'm getting all these, are you okay? It's 100 miles from me. I'm okay. Although there was a very large fire in Mission Valley, which is not that far from me. And another one that way, like 10 miles. Welcome to fire, flood, mud, and drought. Those are our four seasons in California. Oh, an earthquake, yeah. My hearts go out to these folks, right? If something like that happens and wipes out your entire town, there is a whole lot that needs to happen before you can ever get to the point of whipping out your backup system.
Yeah.
Right? You need a building. You need servers.
You need power, which probably is not going to be
power. You probably don't have power, right?
Yep.
The first thing they do in a big fire like that is they cut the power to everything, right? You need communications. We had a great conversation. I'll reference the disaster recovery on the island. They had a big catch-22 because their recovery system required authenticating with their Active Directory system, which was on the mainland.
Yep.
And they didn't have communication with the mainland, right? So you don't have power, you don't have building, you don't have a place for people.
Yeah.
Right? You remember he was sleeping on a cot and eating beans and rice for a couple of weeks.
And
right?
He was lucky that he got beans and rice.
He was.
Right? Because there were a lot of people who didn't even get that.
Yeah. There are always, save like new guy deletes the thing.
Yeah.
I just don't think most people will, and again, this is okay as long as we're all on the same page.
Yeah.
Right? And are there things that you can do to prepare for those things? Yes, you can prepare to be able to provide your own power. You can prepare to be able to provide your own communication. You can, Starlink's a beautiful thing, right? Technologically, Starlink is very amazing. You could have Starlink in advance in your alternate recovery site. You can provide power. You can provide an alternate location. Those are all things you can do to prepare for
ahead of
physical
time.
And natural disasters and terrorist attacks.
But at what cost, though, right? Because standing up a completely secondary data center that is pretty much only ever on standby is a huge cost for tons of organizations.
Which is why, and I'll go back to, I think it was our last episode, I think that the cloud is probably the best recovery scenario for most companies, for most scenarios. Once you get to a certain size or you get to a certain cost level, maybe it makes actually more monetary sense for you to build your own
Yep.
thing, right? And if you can do like an active kind of thing where you have enough capacity where you could be slow rather than not being up at all. You could just say, hey, we're a little slow right now because our compute capacity is lower, but we have all the data in both places. But most people don't have the budget for that. This is why, again, I think that for most companies, most organizations, that the cloud
Makes sense.
it makes sense, right? But again, you have to
Pre-stage your data there, right?
you have to pre-stage your data, right? You have to do all of that. You have to be ready for this. You have to test this. And again, there are still going to be, and this is why I'm still saying I think it's a fantasy for most people.
Well,
Would you agree that the number one reason that most people are reaching for their backups today is ransomware?
I don't have enough data to say one way or
Just
another.
agree, damn it.
But no, I could see that. No, so here's
Do you have a do you think that that's a high possibility?
yes, I do think that's a high
right.
possibility.
So what I'm saying is, if that's the case, we just need to all have a meeting and come to an agreement. Listen, if a ransomware attack happens, 4 hours is fantasy.
But this is where I'm thinking maybe this isn't what people are thinking about when they think about the 4-hour recovery time objective, right? Maybe what they're really thinking about is, hey, my database got corrupted. I need to recover it. Or an admin dropped a table they shouldn't have. I need to recover it. Or I ended up with some issues, right? Or like it's the file server crashed. I need to restore it, right?
Yeah, and those are all good, and you need to prepare for those things, right? I guess I'm saying at least, well,
But because what I'm saying is there are some scenarios where I think people are thinking of the 4-hour recovery time objective, but to your point, maybe they're not thinking about ransomware. Maybe they're not thinking about like an entire city floods. Maybe they're not thinking about natural disasters, right? All of these things are probably outside of what they're thinking about. And maybe the question is, if you do want a 4-hour recovery time objective, that's great, but just make sure it's clear in your mind and with the business, okay, here are the scenarios in which we can make sure that the RTA meets those objectives.
Yeah, or we could say, listen, we're able to meet that RTO in the following scenarios, right?
Yep.
Stupid admin does something, right?
Which is why I asked the question in the very beginning, right? Are people considering all scenarios when they talk about? Because I don't think they have that level of discussion when they're when they're talking to the business, right? I don't think they're necessarily saying, okay, in what scenarios are you considering this and what scenarios are outside of this? And I think that's probably the more important piece to cover is make sure you're having sort of those more detailed scenario questions so you understand what are you signing up for as a backup admin, right? In what scenarios and what is actually going to be feasible versus what is fantasy.
Yeah, so it's a matter of, again, it's a matter of setting expectations.
Yep.
Right? And saying under these scenarios we can meet the RTO, under these scenarios we will not be able to meet the RTO, and no amount of money is going to change that.
Yeah.
Right? Or maybe under these scenarios some amount of money will change it, but we don't have that money.
Yeah. Well, and it's also like when someone comes to you and says, "Hey, I need to back up this application or back up," right? You're having those discussions in terms of, okay, what's your RTO, what's your RPO, right? You want to understand what's the size of the database, what are the requirements, what does the infrastructure look like, all the rest of that. You're asking all these questions up front when it comes to backup. Now extend that to also think about it when it comes to recovery. Okay, really, what are we signing up for?
Yeah. And so,
sorry, didn't mean to take it off topic, but that's kind of what was rolling around.
I don't think we got off topic.
Okay.
That's the whole point of, is basically you just need to have those honest conversations with people. Have the uncomfortable conversations up front rather than when the bad thing happens.
Yeah. And
right?
if you're not thinking about these scenarios, you should be. This is your job, right?
Right.
If you're
Right.
signing up for something, make sure that you're aware of these, like what is possible, because every business is going to be slightly different. Living in a tropical island is going to be very different than living in an Arctic freezing area, right? And so think about the scenarios that matter, or what applies to your business is going to be different depending on what it is that you guys actually do. So think about this and figure out what applies for your company and what scenarios you need to be considering. Of course, there will be the defaults, like think about ransomware. Don't forget about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So I like to say that, every company needs a good pessimist, right? The person that can think of all the worst thing, the Debbie Downer, right? Everybody, you need that person that can say, oh, what about this thing? What about that thing? What about that thing? Right. And so you can, first off, figure out where your deficiencies lie in what scenarios. Well, first off, will you even come close? If you've got a 4-hour RTO and your actual restore time is 4 hours or close to it, you're probably not going to meet the RTO in any scenario.
Yeah.
Right. So, maybe you can look at doing things with the backup system to make your RTA better, getting closer to whatever your agreed upon window is.
Or maybe you need to go back to the business and have that frank discussion.
Right, right. And then the other thing is look at all of the things that, the different scenarios and what needs to happen during these scenarios, right? So scenario one is like a physical server dies, right? What needs to happen when that happens? Well, you need to order a replacement server. Well, if we think we have a 4-hour RTO,
we better have a server on hand.
Right, you better have a server on hand, right? Yeah. Or a series of servers, right? Yeah. And servers do fail, right? You know when they fail, Prasanna?
When you least expect it to?
No.
When someone looks at it.
It's when you let the black smoke out.
Oh.
Servers run on black smoke, and the way you know that is if you let the black smoke out, they stop running.
It's not always the black smoke. It could also be a cup of water.
If the black smoke leaves, if water goes in, the black smoke comes out. You put water in, you will let the black smoke out.
That's true.
I'm just saying. I have let the black smoke out at least once. I plugged in. We used to have these HP 9000 series servers, and they had the cabinets. The cabinets, if I recall correctly, the cabinets came from HP, and then it had a power strip down the back. And the power strip was a standard. What is it? The
110.
The North American.
Yeah. The
2-prong standard North American plug, but it was actually plugged into 220 power, which is fine as long as all your servers are automatic auto sensing, right?
Yeah.
And I swapped out a Spectralogic tape library. I had a malfunctioning one. They sent me a loaner. I sent them the thing, right? They neglected to mention that the loaner was an older model that did not have auto sensing power, and there was a little switch that I needed to flip. I did not flip it. And so it was set to 110. I plugged it into 220. I let the black smoke out, and it stopped working.
Good job, Curtis.
Yeah. So, when you got to have, that's, I think it's a pretty common thing to deal with is the physical failure of a server in your environment. The other is stupid admin error.
Yep.
Right. And then we start talking about much bigger things, right? Fires that take out data centers, floods that take out data centers, earthquakes, fires that take out towns, or floods, and then we can talk about like terrorist actions. Think about all these different scenarios, and then of course we now add to that. We add
ransomware,
right?
And you don't need to solve for all of these, by the way, right? We're not saying
Right.
make sure that you have something listed, but just at least think about and be explicit in terms of these are the ones we're covering. These are the ones that really matter for our business. These scenarios we can't cover because it's technology, it's cost, it's whatever it is. It doesn't make sense to our business,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Good, better, best, right?
Yeah.
Start with what you can fix. Work your way up to the more difficult ones. I think the most difficult one is going to be ransomware. Because, even like the worst fire, the worst terrorist attack is easy to recover from if you know you're going to do it in advance. You just need an alternate location. I mean, you need lots of money. You need an alternate location. You need alternate power, alternate communications, all those things. Yeah. You can even like prep it so that it could come up like that. Ransomware, it's different.
It gets into everything and you can't trust what you're getting back.
You don't know what's broken. You don't know what's not broken. It's actively happening.
Yep.
It's like a fire that's eating up your data center, but you can't see it. Right?
Methanol.
What's that?
A methanol fire.
What are you talking about?
Methanol?
Yeah.
Yeah. It burns clear. You can't tell you're actually on fire.
Okay. These are things I didn't need to know.
Yep.
I didn't know that.
Yep. You don't.
There's no flame with a methanol fire?
It's clear.
That doesn't sound good, Prasanna.
So in drag race cars, which is a YouTube hobby that I like to watch,
Yeah.
So they do switch to methanol because it's cooler burning because it doesn't produce as much heat.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, the problem is if it catches on fire, you don't know it's on fire. And so they have to be very careful with, because you might actually be on fire and not even know it.
That does not sound good. Yeah. Well, thanks for adding that
Yep.
new thing for my brain to wrap its head around. All right. Any final thoughts?
Nope. I think we covered it. Yeah. Just, I think the one key thing is realize it's not just two terms that you care about, RTO and RPO. You should also be considering and worried about RTA and RPA, right? Your actuals.
Absolutely. Yeah, your actuals. Yeah. All right. And with that, I want to say thank you to you, Prasanna, once again.
Thank you, Curtis. I hope that your washer dryer install goes smoothly and you end up with clean clothes.
Me too. And thank you to our listeners. You know we do this for you. That is a wrap. The Backup Wrap-Up is written, recorded, and produced by me, W. Curtis Preston. If you need backup or DR consulting, content generation, or expert witness work, check out backupcentral.com. You can also find links for my O'Reilly books on the same website. Remember, this is an independent podcast, and any opinions that you hear are those of the speaker and not necessarily an employer. Thanks for listening.